Now, I would argue that JavaScript is not necessarily the most complex or difficult programming language to learn, but it definitely is a complex topic to dive into. Also, because JavaScript in the end is not just about the language and its core features, but also about the different environments in which you can use that language, for example, the browser or Node.js. And those environments influence what you can do with the language. Now, if we therefore think about JavaScript as a topic, we of course have some basics which you need to know when you dive into it. Something like the core syntax, core programming concepts, variables, functions, control structures, so if statements and loops, objects, arrays, and much, much more. And then, once you're a bit into that, you will dive into more advanced concepts, like in the browser, DOM manipulation, so changing or adding elements on the web page, events, callback functions, working with browser APIs like setting timers or getting the location of the user, error handling, and also much, much more, including constructor functions and so on. And then if we dig even deeper, we dive into very advanced topics like efficient memory management, performance, patterns and best practices, maybe also into algorithms you can write with JavaScript and how you should reason about those. And you will also, of course, dive deeper into certain concepts that make up JavaScript, like prototypes and so on. So JavaScript is made up of a lot of different areas you can explore to fully learn the topic. And the good news is, I do have a course where I explore all those areas. And that's my JavaScript the Complete Guide course. I already do have such a course, and needless to say, it's a huge course. It's more than 50 hours because JavaScript has that many topics and areas to explore. Now, that is a great course to learn all about JavaScript. But in JavaScript, there are certain, I would say, tricky elements, tricky aspects in the language and in the entire area of JavaScript, which are worth a closer look. Now, I will say that these areas are also covered in that Complete Guide course, but of course scattered out in that course and touched on in different areas of the course, because sometimes you first have to learn concept A before you can dive into a certain tricky part that might be related to that concept. And that's where this course comes into play. I identified a couple of tricky areas or elements in JavaScript, which I'll focus on in this course. This course does therefore not replace my Complete Guide course. Instead, it requires JavaScript knowledge, but it's a great resource for you to quickly look up certain concepts or dive into some isolated concepts where you find all the knowledge in one place instead of scattered out in different sections of the course. And now, of course, the question is, which tricky parts are covered in this course? We'll take a closer look at scope and hoisting and everything that is related to this, and I will explain how it works and why it works the way it works. By the way, I will do that for all those areas. We'll take a closer look at loops, because we got a couple of different loops in JavaScript, and they all behave slightly different. And it is worth outlining the differences, when to use which loop, and some tricky parts related to loops. We'll explore primitive and reference values, a super important concept, which I know is something a lot of developers are struggling with. So I have a whole section dedicated to just that, where I can explain it in depth. We'll have a look at closures, what closures are and what's special about them. And we'll have a look at recursion, how that works and how you get the most out of recursion. We'll explore direct versus indirect function calls, as I would like to call it, and related to that, callback functions, and when you directly call a function opposed to letting it call by someone else. We'll explore asynchronous code and the different tools we got for working with async code in vanilla JavaScript. And we'll explore the this keyword, which is the most strange thing in JavaScript, I would argue. And last but not least, we'll take a closer look at prototypes and how prototypes help us implement inheritance with JavaScript. So these are the selected areas we'll take a closer look at in this course, because I would argue that these are the strangest things in JavaScript or the areas where a lot of developers are struggling with. So therefore, I collected them all in this course so that we can take a closer look at them step by step in individual modules.